This past summer, I spent 2 weeks in Greece with my family and another family. It was a marvelous vacation. We spent 2 days in Athens. We spent a week touring the northern Cyclades islands by sailboat. We spent another few days in the mountains. I did not check my email. And my body relaxed as it hadn't since ordination, probably about 8 years back. And fear traveled with me on this trip. I mentioned that we spent a week on a boat. Well, so the Talmud, as you may know, tells parents that they are to teach their children to swim. And my kids, aged 10 and almost 8, do know how to swim. They don't yet know how to no life jacket in the Mediterranean swim. And on board we had only adult-sized life jackets. So when we anchored in a bay off of the island of Kia on the first night, and our friends plunged into the sparkling salty water with happy cries, I anxiously tugged the long black straps of the adult-sized life jackets around my impatient children, twining the straps around their backs and through their legs and tying weird knots and just trying to make it work. And the boys popped into the water, finally, and their life jackets popped up and darn near off. We swam for about 10 minutes, maybe. My heart was in my mouth the entire time. And then I hustled the boys back onto the boat, and I rubbed them down with towels, and I fed them dinner, fretting all the while over the sea. That night in bed, for an hour, I had visions of my youngest drowning, his sweet small body sinking as the hungry sea closed over his head. I woke up the next morning badly rested and jittery, and I thought, I can't do this. I cannot ruin my children's vacation and my own. I can't tell them that they can't do what they see their friends doing all week. My fear isn't groundless. I knew that. The ocean is deep. They're not capable of dealing with it on their own. And I can't tie my children up in the knots of my own fear. I have to figure out how to live with it and how to let them live with it too. Fear, particularly trauma-based fear, is a tricky, tricky beast. Trauma sends our panicking hindbrains into hyperdrive. In a book called Wounds into Wisdom, Healing Intergenerational Jewish Trauma, Rabbi Tirza Firestone writes that when something terrible happens that overwhelms our coping mechanisms, the part of our brain that usually will absorb and analyze and process experiences takes a back seat. Instead, she writes, the emotional brain, the limbic area and the brainstem takes over, and it is hardwired for speed and survival. Our ability to see and integrate and store the incoming information is markedly reduced, and so, too, she says, is our capacity to witness ourselves. The tidal wave flowing from our emotional brain centers washes away nuance, and it turns the world black and white. Rabbi Firestone calls this limbic lava. Fear narrows our options. In our Rosh Hashanah Torah readings, 3 different parents, I think, act in fear. Sarah speaks of her fear for Yitzhak's future inheritance. She tells Abraham to banish Yishmael and Hagar, his son, and his son's mother, into danger, severing them forever from their family. Hagar miserably sits far away so that Ishmael's thirsty death cries might not reach her. And we just heard how Abraham brings Yitzhak up Mount Moriah to sacrifice him at God's dread command. I agree with Rabbi Kula, Liza. I think that's what was going on. Rabbi Firestone writes about the importance of cultivating an inner witness. She calls this the neutral observer who tracks our experiences with kind, alert attention. It is neither judge nor critic, nor even the problem solver inside of us, but rather the calm, self-aware part of ourselves that is wakeful, curious, and on our team. Witness lives inside our statement of faith, Shema. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. If you look in a Torah scroll, the ayin at the end of the Shema and the dalet at the end of echad are written large to form the word aid, or witness. We witness the divine in this world, and the divine witnesses us. In our Rosh Hashanah stories, neither Avraham nor Hagar can hear past their terror for their children. A divine witness steps in, who calls them by name and allows them to better process and analyze where they are and what is in fact happening. When the voice of the angel cries out to Avraham, his frenzy of pious fear dissipates, and he reorients himself as he answers, Hineni, here I am. Here I am, preparing to kill my child, and it is not right. Avraham, having been witnessed by that voice, is able to hear the angel's offer of the ram in the thicket, and he makes a different choice than the one he would have made moments before. When the voice of the angel calls out to Hagar, she also opens her eyes, and she's able to see a life-saving well of water that might have been there the whole time, according to some commentators. Sarah's story is different. Avraham is distressed by her command to expel Hagar and Ishmael, but God, and here I'm indebted again to Liza because I read this one way this morning and I'm reading it another way now, God clamps down, or so most of our interpretations say, and says, don't be distressed, whatever Sarah tells you, do. That is not actually what's in the Hebrew. It says, Kol asher tomar elecha Sarah, everything Sarah tells you, shema bekolach, listen to her voice. And we could also say, witness what is happening in her voice. Be that witness for her. Either way, Avraham doesn't do it. He is terrified and doesn't speak up, and nobody witnesses Sarah's fear or the pain of her vulnerability, which might be fueling it. Her unexamined fear instead commands her and Avraham and their whole family, we could say our whole people, loses because of it. We feel grief when our fears are realized as loss, and then we feel fear again, lest fresh grief rock our world. I lost my nephew Eric 3 years ago to an accidental drug overdose. And I know in my bones how badly I could panic if a child of mine were to abuse a drug because of the pain of this tragedy. I might interrogate my kid, I might ground them, I might yell at them, I might stop trusting them. Fear could take over my parenting. As a Jewish community, each and all of us have felt the grief of terrible loss increase exponentially since October 7th. We've felt it in different ways. Beloved people killed and taken captive, treasured relationships in tatters, deep values betrayed or in conflict, loss of our own sense of Jewish safety even here in America, as anti-Semitism and yes, Islamophobia too, have skyrocketed. Fear of fresh losses courses within us, and the kol demama daka, that still small voice of our inner witness, is very hard to hear. Vera, Irit Ronen, and Avner Dinur, who are 3 scholars from Sapir College in the Negev, right in the Gaza envelope of the border region, live where missile fire is constant, and that was true many years before last fall's tragedy. In a collection of essays published this year, they use the phrase emergency routine to talk about the way they see the experience of emergency normalized in Israel, suspending peacetime laws and peacetime behavioral codes. Weiss, Ronen, and Dinur date the beginning of this emergency routine not to October 7th, but to 1948, the establishment of the State of Israel, which Palestinians call the Nakba, the catastrophe of expulsion. Today, of course, the frighteningly escalating hostilities with Lebanon and Iran are part of the ongoing Israeli emergency. Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank also live in emergency routine. Poet and researcher Yusuf Al-Qidra writes recently from Gaza that we are here in an intense collision with a final moment at any time and in all places without exception. When every day, every hour, every step can and does bring attack, that limbic lava, that flows. Traumatic losses multiply, inner witnesses detach, and what was unthinkable becomes an option. The government of a Jewish state, hems another people into two corners of land behind endless checkpoints and barriers. Young people strap on vests full of explosives. Hospitals and schools are bombed. Crowds cheer on atrocities. Former IDF soldier and scholar Omer Bartov retold his conversation earlier this year with recently returned IDF soldiers who said, after what they did to us, we have no choice but to root them out. After we did what we did to them, we can only imagine what they would do to us if we don't destroy them. We simply have no choice. I see stakes rise and choices narrow here in America too, as we also experience, although at a crucial physical remove, this fog of war. Jews are painted as dangerous monoliths. We're used as political footballs and scapegoats. Anti-Semitic and Islamophobic vandalism, physical attacks, and threats have increased. Family tables have gone silent. Universities have erupted. Students have been doxxed by adults. They're identifying information published without consent to target them. We can still choose to live by our hopes rather than by our fears. Israel and Hamas successfully held brief ceasefires to allow foreign aid workers last month to administer the first dose of a polio vaccine in Gaza. During these briefest of breathing spaces, minutes, hours were the longest ones, the armed powers in the Holy Land chose to work together to preserve life. Those ceasefires are over now, and doubtless there are freshly vaccinated children among the newest dead in Gaza. And we don't know if the remaining child hostages from Israel are still alive, and if so, whether they received vaccines. Yet fear is not the only common experience of Palestinians and Israelis, Jews and Muslims, there and here. We also share the experience of seismic loss and the grief that follows. Grief can isolate, but we can choose to let it connect us. We can ask our grief to teach us how to love each other better. We can ask it to help us to choose life, to value each moment we have with our loved ones, and to work for a shared future in which we all lose less and thrive more. Some Israelis and Palestinians are doing just this together in the Parents Circle Families Forum, which is a group of bereaved parents and family members, people who have lost kind of first connection of kin. They're doing this in writing, in difficult dialogue, and in fierce advocacy. And former hostages and their families continue to speak out about how their grief drives them to choose life, and how they are urging governments to do the same. Liat Atzili is an Israeli high school teacher in Kiryat Gan. She's an educator at Yad Vashem, the Israeli Shoah Memorial Museum. And she was taken hostage by Hamas on October 7th and released 2 months later to learn that her husband, Avi, had been killed in the attack. Liat wrote in February in an op-ed, "I am humbled by how my fellow Israelis put their lives at risk to fight my kidnappers, but I do not feel any catharsis in seeing the destruction of Gaza. Instead, I want to focus on building a better future for my 3 children and for the children of Gaza. For me," she writes, "Tekuma, or rebirth, is not only about Jewish lives, it's also about all those lives that shattered on October 7th and after, including those of my non-Jewish neighbors, Israeli citizens who have been caught up in the battles ever since. It also means, Tekuma also means, working towards a rebirth for Gaza." So how do we choose life when we're in the grip, we're in the clutches of great and appropriate fear? How do we choose rebirth when we are submerged in catastrophic grief? There is no blueprint. Nothing about this choice, particularly in this moment as we continue to read the news stories, is easy. Our tradition offers 3 possibilities that I'll share with you today. Each one of us can turn intentionally to our inner witness, noticing our daily fears, how that limbic lava rises up, what possibilities are submerged beneath it, asking ourselves gently, Ayeka, where are you? Where am I? Where am I in this moment? What am I doing? Is it what I want to do? Is it something that lets me live my values? And if not, what's binding me to the path I'm on? And might there be another choice that I can make? When we see a loved one struggling in their own fear, in the weight of their own grief, we can also be that voice on their team who witnesses and asks them without judgment, Ayeka, where are you right now? Is this what you want to be doing? We can invite that person, that community, to reground in themselves. David Krieger drew our attention in Torah study this past Shabbat to the presence of communal witness in one of the Hebrew words for community, Edah. We come together as a witness. We come together to witness each other. And when the fear freight train is gathering steam, as it does and it will, consider the Torah of Sefer Yetzirah. Imratz libacha, shuv la'echad. If your heart is racing, return to the one. Imratz libacha, shuv la'echad. In moments of fear, particularly during travel, I find myself saying the Shema over and over again, like a mantra, Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad, Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. And I connect to the oneness of the universe and to a sense of myself as what Rabbi J. Michelson calls a ripple on the ocean of the divine. This oneness grounds me, and it's reassuring to see myself and my fears within that larger perspective, that I and my fear are a ripple on the ocean of existence. There is more to life than that. Imratz libacha, shuv la'echad. The one that grounds you might not be God. That might not be how you name it or relate to it. It might be your connections to your family, to your community, to the people Israel, to global humanity. It might be the natural world, might be the laws of physics. When we ask ourselves to be witnesses to a reality larger than ourselves, that reality witnesses us. And as our heartbeats slow and our breath steadies and our eyes open, we can look for paths other than those of fear. And there is one more tool that we have. We can bring to light the pain and the grief that underlie our fear. Leadership coach Yotam Schachter teaches that fear protects us from feeling pain to which we really should be paying attention. And he says, when you honor the pain that fear is protecting you from, it metabolizes into wise caution and grief and relief. Wise caution meaning, what reasonable steps can I take to ensure adequate safety? Can I tie those knots tighter? Grief, what do I need to let go of? And the relief is, what becomes possible now when I've honored that grief, when I've paid attention to that pain? When we find that we have bound our children and ourselves on the altar of our fears, we can say, Hineni. We can remember who and where we are. We can honor our pain without being bound by it. We always have choice. We read last Shabbat from the Torah, and we're going to read it again on Yom Kippur morning. I call heaven and earth to witness with you this day. I have put before you life and death, blessing and curse. Choose life so that you and yours live. That morning this summer, on the boat in that little sheltered bay in Kia, I breathed deeply. Mike and I spent more time experimenting with the life jacket straps how to bind the jackets to our boys' bodies more securely in a way that could still let them move. And we worked out a buddy system where one of us would swim with each child. And for the rest of the week, we all lived in and on that water. Hair stiff with salt, skin crackling with it, exploring each new cove and beach with our friends. We lived each moment as fully as we could, and my fear did not disappear. And I learned to swim with it. Shana Tova.